What if the shields we have long trusted, those billion-dollar Western air defense systems, suddenly failed? Imagine waking up in a city where the sirens wail, but for once, nobody trusts that the sky above is safe. Picture a nation under siege, its last lines of protection crumbling in real time. On October 27th, Ukraine faced this nightmare not as a distant possibility, but as a brutal awakening. Across the breadth of Ukraine, Russian forces unleashed a meticulously coordinated assault that military historians may one day compare to the opening salvos of the Tet Offensive in Vietnam or the Blitz over London during the Second World War. Waves of missiles and swarms of drones struck from the capital's vibrant heart to the vital southern ports that keep the economy alive. This was no ordinary barrage. It was a deliberate, high-stakes gambit to overwhelm every layer of defense, test the resolve of the nation, and send a message to its allies. The operation was so synchronized that some analysts later dubbed it Operation Overwhelm. In the chaos, Western air defense systems, especially the much-lauded Patriot complexes, the NASAMS batteries, and the IRIS-T arrays, were pushed to their limits and then beyond. Reports from the front lines described their effectiveness as near zero against the sheer volume and variety of incoming threats. The myth of technological invincibility, built over decades from the Gulf War's Patriot missile successes to the Iron Dome's feats in Israel, shattered in a single, relentless night. In Kyiv, the city that had once boasted of near-total protection, the sky was now a source of dread. On the ground near Pokrovsk, Ukrainian lines buckled under the unyielding pressure. Exhausted, outnumbered troops, some of whom had held their positions for months, began to fall back in confusion, echoing scenes from the worst days of the Eastern Front in the Second World War. Sectors that had long seemed unbreakable were abandoned within hours, leaving gaping holes in the defense and exposing entire towns and cities to further devastation. It was an unraveling not seen since the early days of the invasion. The consequences rippled quickly beyond the battlefield. Rumors spread of a precision strike on a key Black Sea port, one that may have targeted high-ranking Western officers embedded with Ukrainian command. The mere suggestion sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. The stakes escalated overnight, threatening not just morale, but the very foundation of international involvement. In capitals across Europe and North America, officials scrambled to assess the risk to their own personnel and the wisdom of continued engagement. Meanwhile, Russia unveiled terrifying new weaponry. Among the arsenal, a monstrous 3-ton aerial bomb, a weapon capable of erasing entire city blocks with a single blast. This device, reminiscent of the Second World War's Grand Slam bomb, signaled a new willingness to escalate destruction. The message could not have been clearer. The war was entering a new, even more destructive phase, one in which raw power and relentless adaptation began to eclipse the promises of high technology and precision. If Western military superiority can be nullified so quickly, what does that mean for our assumptions about defense, deterrence, and the future of warfare itself? Are we witnessing a turning point for Ukraine, or for the entire global balance of power? What does it truly mean when a nation's most expensive, celebrated defenses fail in a matter of hours? To understand how Ukraine and its allies reached this moment of crisis, we must look back at the evolving dynamics and hidden vulnerabilities of this grinding war. We must ask, how did the conflict spiral into this irreversible turning point? In the dead of night on October 27th, Ukraine was struck by the most meticulously synchronized and far-reaching assault since the beginning of the war. This was not a routine volley. It was a calculated campaign that stretched from Kyiv to the strategic ports of Odessa, and further east to Kharkiv and Sumy. No corner of the country escaped unscathed as the offensive swept over city after city, recalling the shock and awe tactics seen during the invasion of Iraq in 2003, but on an even broader scale. The intent behind the barrage was unmistakable. Russia targeted the backbone of Ukraine's resistance: power stations, ammunition depots, vital logistics hubs, and communication centers. Each strike aimed to disrupt, exhaust, and ultimately paralyze both military strength and civilian resolve. The selection of targets was chillingly precise, reminiscent of NATO's air campaign in Serbia in 1999, when the focus was on military command nodes and infrastructure to break the opponent's will to fight. Across the nation, eyewitnesses and online footage captured the chaos. Flames illuminated the night sky, neighborhoods vanished beneath clouds of smoke, and stunned residents watched their cities transform into war zones overnight. Even battle-hardened observers were shaken by the scale. Familiar skylines erased in hours, entire districts plunged into confusion and fear. The psychological impact mirrored the terror felt by Londoners during the Blitz, when each night brought new uncertainty and loss. But it was not just the breadth of destruction that stunned the world. It was the dramatic evolution in Russian tactics. Instead of relying solely on brute force, Russia launched waves of relatively cheap drones to saturate Ukrainian air defenses, then layered in cruise and ballistic missiles to exploit any openings. These overlapping threats overwhelmed Ukrainian air defense operators, forcing commanders to ration precious interceptors and make agonizing decisions about which targets to prioritize. Defenses that once seemed invincible now showed fatal cracks. It was a playbook reminiscent of the Israeli Air Force's tactics during the Yom Kippur War, where quantity and surprise overcame quality and preparation. This was operational adaptability in motion, where old faith in sheer technological superiority gave way to methodical attrition. The grinding pressure on Ukrainian forces, and on their Western suppliers, reached new heights. Exhaustion set in. Morale frayed. With every night raid, the question grew. How much longer could Ukraine's defenders, and their allies, hold the line? To overlook these shifting tactics is to miss how modern wars are won and lost. The battlefield is no longer defined exclusively by advanced weaponry, but by resilience, adaptation, and the will to endure relentless strain. As historian Stephen Biddle has argued, wars are often won not by who has the best equipment, but by who learns and adapts fastest under fire. Yet the true shockwave was not only the devastation. It was the stunning breach of defenses that many had once believed impenetrable. Suddenly, the illusion of security was shattered. What followed was a desperate scramble to adapt, on both sides. Could billions of dollars worth of Western arms truly collapse under the pressure of relentless, adaptive tactics? This unsettling question moved from anxious speculation to undeniable fact on the battlefields of Ukraine, much as the Maginot Line once proved irrelevant in the face of rapidly advancing German armor in 1940. For months, Patriot and NASAMS air defense systems stood as the pride of Western military aid, symbols of technological superiority, promising protection against the worst assaults. These systems, costing millions per launcher and hundreds of thousands for each interceptor, were showcased in military parades and global arms expos as the epitome of modern defense. But on October 27th, when Russian forces unleashed a massive, meticulously coordinated barrage, these systems faltered. Wave after wave of missiles and drones hammered Ukrainian positions, challenging every expectation of invincibility. The Russian approach was not merely overwhelming, it was calculated and evolving. By mixing missile types, altering flight paths, and staggering launch times, Russian commanders systematically picked apart Ukrainian air defenses. Ukrainian crews found themselves fighting an enemy that outmatched them not only in numbers, but in tactical creativity. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and kamikaze drones each exploited a different vulnerability, slipping through gaps even in the most advanced shield. This approach mirrored the way that during the Battle of Britain, the German Luftwaffe constantly shifted target priorities and attack methods to probe for weaknesses in British defenses. Within hours, grim reality set in. Ukrainian air defense units were burning through interceptor missiles at an unsustainable rate. The painstakingly assembled stocks, painfully shipped and resupplied by Western partners over months, could not match the tempo of the Russian onslaught. Each hour of combat drained their reserves, pushing defenders closer to exhaustion and exposing the limits of Western logistical support. Supply chain bottlenecks, reminiscent of those seen in the Korean War, suddenly became existential threats. Throughout that harrowing night, one absence was impossible to ignore. The much-awaited F-16 jets never took to the skies. Ukrainian commanders, perhaps fearing catastrophic losses, or aware of the futility of deploying a handful of new jets against such a massive onslaught, chose to keep these precious aircraft grounded. Instead of risking their few high-tech fighters in the chaos of a missile storm, they decided to hold them in reserve, a gamble on future necessity over immediate action. This echoed the cautious deployment of the British Spitfire squadrons in the early days of the Battle of Britain, when commanders waited for the decisive moment to commit their most valuable assets. This was no mistake. Russian strategy was built on the logic of cumulative pressure, designed to grind down even the most sophisticated defenses. Every missile launched, every drone dispatched, was a test of Ukrainian endurance and the West's ability to keep pace. Over time, the cracks in the defensive shield widened. By dawn, the message from both Western and Ukrainian officials had changed. Statements grew more cautious, quietly conceding that the much-hailed advanced systems were only partially effective against this new phase of Russian attacks. The myth of perfect air defense was shattered, at least for now. The world was forced to recall historical moments when military overconfidence proved fatal, such as the early days of the First World War, when French commanders believed their élan vital could withstand German artillery barrages. The consequences radiated far beyond the front lines. Strikes on Ukraine's critical infrastructure triggered rolling blackouts across major cities, plunging millions into darkness. In Kyiv, life ground to a halt. Public transit froze, entire neighborhoods disappeared into shadow, and the rhythms of daily life became impossible to maintain. Hospitals switched to emergency generators, grocery stores rationed perishables, and families huddled in basements for safety. The psychological strain mounted alongside the physical devastation, as uncertainty and exhaustion seeped in. The effect was not unlike the rolling blackouts endured by Londoners during the worst nights of the Blitz, or the power outages that marked Baghdad during the opening phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom. All of this reveals a sobering truth. Over-reliance on high-tech solutions can breed strategic overconfidence and disastrous miscalculations. The price of this lesson, paid in dwindling resources and battered morale, is already being felt in Ukraine and throughout its Western supporters. The echoes of past military debacles, from the fall of Singapore in 1942 to the collapse of the Soviet Union's Afghan campaign, are hard to ignore. As Ukrainian defenses buckled and the missile storm continued, the front lines themselves began to unravel, setting the stage for a new, perilous chapter in the conflict. What followed in the hours after would test not just Ukraine's defenses, but the very resolve of its people and allies. The consequences of this turning point would ripple far beyond the battlefield. What happens when a fortress does not shatter from one blow, but is worn down by relentless, grinding pressure? The battle for Pokrovsk exposed the answer. Ukrainian units withdrew in confusion, command structures unraveled, and every last reserve was flung into the maelstrom. As cohesion dissolved, panic rippled through the defenders in real time, recalling the chaos of retreat from Dunkirk or the encirclement at Stalingrad. This collapse was contagious. Across the region, Russian forces exploited the breach, cutting off supply routes and severing lines of communication. Their columns drove forward, accelerating into gaps, while Ukrainian defenders scrambled to regroup inside towns now isolated and encircled. Radio silence and disrupted command channels only deepened the confusion. Urban warfare erupted overnight. Isolated garrisons fought among shattered buildings, desperate to hold ground as support vanished. Each street became a new front, every block a test of nerve as the fighting surged inward, overwhelming hastily organized lines. The scenes echoed those of Grozny in the 1990s, where block-by-block fighting left cities in ruins and defenders stretched to the breaking point. The chaos extended far beyond the immediate front. Russian strikes targeted vital infrastructure deep in the rear, with Chernomorsk becoming a symbol of vulnerability. Explosions rocked the port, reportedly wounding or killing Western advisors. The shock reverberated through local populations and foreign capitals alike. The message was stark. Not even rear areas hosting foreign personnel were safe now, much as the American embassy in Saigon came under attack during the Tet Offensive, signaling a new level of risk for foreign involvement. Destruction escalated as Russia unleashed its heaviest arsenal. A single strike from a bomb weighing 3 tons erased entire city blocks, transforming neighborhoods into wastelands of twisted metal and ash. There was nothing random about these attacks. Each was a calculated demonstration, designed to extinguish hope and paralyze resistance. The use of such massive ordnance recalled the devastation wrought by the American daisy cutter bombs in Vietnam and Afghanistan, weapons chosen not just for their lethality, but for their psychological effect on defenders and civilians alike. Morale collapsed under this relentless assault. Exhaustion lined the faces of soldiers and civilians alike, visible in every broadcast and social media post. Defiance faded, replaced by uncertainty and fear. Blackouts, ruined streets, and the dread of another night under bombardment became the new normal for thousands. The psychological toll mirrored the experience of besieged Leningrad, where daily survival became an act of quiet heroism. Even Western media began to shift. The earlier certainty gave way to cautious ambiguity, as reports quietly questioned whether Ukrainian defenses could hold at all. In Washington, Berlin, and London, policymakers grew uneasy, debating the wisdom and effectiveness of continued support. Parallels to the debates in Congress during the Vietnam War or the British Parliament during the Suez Crisis were hard to ignore. The new risk was undeniable. When a nation's systems, military, logistical, psychological, can be methodically worn down, no alliance and no technology is immune to attrition. The war was no longer only a matter of weapons, but of endurance, adaptation, and the will to survive. The lessons of the First World War's war of attrition on the Western Front now seemed chillingly relevant once again. But even as Ukraine reeled, new questions emerged about what might come next. Could either side adapt quickly enough to break the spiral of attrition, or would the conflict grind on into an even more dangerous and unpredictable phase? Would the war's outcome be decided on the battlefield, or in the hearts and minds of those watching from afar? What do we truly learn when supposedly unbreakable systems falter in real time? The latest shockwave in the Ukraine conflict has demolished old certainties, forcing even the most confident observers to reconsider what matters in war. It is a lesson as old as the siege of Constantinople, when the advent of gunpowder artillery rendered ancient walls obsolete. Success in this drawn-out fight is proving less about cutting-edge weaponry and more about adaptability and sheer endurance. Victory is now determined not only by firepower, but by the ability to bend without breaking, on the front lines and deep within society itself. It is the difference between the fate of Carthage, which fell to Rome's relentless siege, and that of Britain, which endured and ultimately triumphed during the darkest days of World War II. Russian forces have shifted with grim determination, abandoning brute force in favor of methodical, targeted attacks. Their new strategy focuses on undermining logistics, sabotaging supply lines, and letting the grind of attrition do what missiles alone cannot. Every carefully chosen strike erodes infrastructure, but also gnaws at the heart of the enemy's capacity to fight on. The parallels to the German U-boat campaign in the Atlantic, targeting Allied shipping, are striking. Ukraine, once celebrated for resilience and its Western-backed technological edge, now faces the dangerous downside of dependence. As Western aid slows or arrives too late, cracks appear in even the strongest defenses. Delays in resupply have exposed vital systems, forced improvisation, and left defenders straining to keep up, while morale wavers under the weight of constant uncertainty. It is a scenario reminiscent of the final days of the South Vietnamese army, which crumbled as American support dwindled. But the challenge is not only faced by soldiers. Civilians, caught in the crossfire, have learned to improvise amid daily blackouts, empty shelves, and the ever-present threat of attack. Their resourcefulness is remarkable, but comes at a steep cost: the grinding psychological toll of life under siege. In every shelter, families share stories of resilience, echoing the spirit of besieged Sarajevo or Aleppo, where life stubbornly continued in the face of devastation. This phase of the war has become a harsh lesson in the limitations of technology. Western analysts who once relied on the supposed invincibility of advanced systems are now questioning their faith. The battlefield itself has become an arena where endurance and creativity rival the value of any hardware. It is a dynamic scene in countless historical conflicts, from the American Revolution's use of guerrilla tactics to the Afghan resistance against the Soviet Union. At its core, this conflict is less about territory and more about the resilience of entire systems and societies. The true test is which side can absorb relentless pressure and adapt when early advantages fade away. Historical examples abound. During the Second World War, it was not just the Red Army's tanks, but the Soviet people's ability to endure hardship that ultimately broke the German invasion. Ignore these lessons, and the world risks repeating mistakes, investing in the wrong tools, clinging to outdated doctrines, and believing in the illusion of easy dominance. Only by understanding the realities of adaptation, resilience, and the limits of technology can we prepare for whatever comes next on the global stage. This is why military leaders from Sun Tzu to Clausewitz have always emphasized the importance of flexibility and morale over mere hardware. But this turning point is not just a matter of shifting tactics. It is a reckoning for everyone invested in the outcome. The consequences will ripple far beyond the borders of Ukraine, touching alliances, doctrines, and the ways in which nations understand their own security. Will the real lesson of Ukraine be understood in time, or only after the price becomes unbearable? Are the world's capitals ready to rethink their strategies, or will they cling to comforting illusions until events overtake them? The massed strikes that began on October 27th did more than redraw front lines. They shattered the illusion of Western technological dominance and forced the world to confront a stark reality. In a grinding war of attrition, even the most advanced defenses can be outmaneuvered, and resolve alone is not always enough. This echoes the sobering lessons learned after the fall of France in 1940, when static defenses proved no match for a determined, adaptive adversary. For months, it seemed plausible to believe that high-tech systems could keep cities safe, or that the determination of Ukraine and its allies would hold the line indefinitely. But this new phase has exposed something far more unsettling. Adaptation, rapid, ruthless, and relentless, is now overpowering technological edge. The same lesson was learned by the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, when local guerrilla tactics outpaced the Red Army's firepower. Each failed missile intercept, every blackout plunging a city into darkness, and each forced retreat all echo the same warning. Traditional assumptions about security are falling apart. Trusting in technology alone, or believing that willpower ensures victory, has proven to be a dangerous fantasy. The world is reminded of the fate of the French fleet at Mers el-Kebir, sunk by their own allies because old alliances and assumptions could not adapt to new realities. The stakes are enormous. The security of entire nations, and the world, now depends on how swiftly we absorb these lessons. If we cling to outdated thinking and expect yesterday's solutions to solve today's threats, we risk repeating the errors that brought us to the brink. The cost of failing to adapt is not only measured in lost battles, but in lost futures. This is the moment to reconsider our deepest beliefs about war and defense. Ukraine's ordeal is not just about drones and missiles. It is a wake-up call for urgent adaptability, on the battlefield, in strategy rooms, and in our collective mindset. Are we willing to shed our illusions before the next crisis erupts? Are we prepared to ask the uncomfortable questions and make the necessary changes? History is rarely forgiving to those who ignore its signals. From the fall of Rome to the collapse of the Soviet Union, civilizations have paid dearly for failing to adapt in time. The challenge today is not just for Ukraine, but for every nation that relies on technology, alliances, or hope alone to secure its future. As we look beyond the headlines, the question is stark. Will we recognize the new shape of conflict while there is still time, or only when the damage is beyond repair? The answer will define not only the fate of Ukraine, but the future of security in a world where change is the only constant.